It's a fire even he couldn't put out. A respected Wyoming fire chief now facing accusations no badge can extinguish. Chief Darrick Mittlestadt and his wife Angela were arrested, both charged with child abuse and conspiracy. Authorities say the couple starved and abused their 13-year-old adopted son, leaving him so malnourished he weighed just 55 pounds. That child is now safe, but the legal heat is just beginning. I'm Kennedi Walker, and this is Law and Crime. Laramie County Fire District No. 1 Chief Darrick Mittlestadt is behind bars tonight, facing disturbing accusations. Mittlestadt and his wife Angela are charged with aggravated child abuse and conspiracy, accused of starving and imprisoning their 13-year-old adopted son, leaving him so malnourished, police say he weighed just 55 pounds. According to documents obtained by Wyoming News Now, the couple adopted the child back in 2019 while living in Colorado. The investigation reportedly began this June when Angela allegedly dropped the teen off at a youth development center, instructing him to say he needed somewhere to live. The boy was taken to the hospital, where doctors discovered long-term malnourishment, arrested bone growth, and visible signs of starvation, noting his ribs and collarbones were protruding, and he even had hair loss. Medical staff said if he hadn't been brought in when he did, his risk of death would have increased. According to the affidavit, the boy told police he was given just one meal a day, typically white bread, ham, and vegetables with Gatorade, and that heavy items were used to barricade his bedroom door from the outside, trapping him inside. He claimed he hadn't been allowed to play with his younger brother or visit his father at the fire station in years. When asked why his mother allegedly treated him that way, the teen reportedly said it was because he wasn't nice and did things like wet the bed and pick at his skin. When questioned, Angela allegedly told investigators, quote, "I'm an idiot. I thought I could help him." She claimed the teen had a traumatic past, was defiant, and refused to eat or sleep, and that parenting both boys alone while her husband was away at the firehouse was overwhelming. She also said she didn't ask for help, claiming he wasn't anyone else's problem. She drove him to the youth center on June 22nd after saying she smelled poop. All of this, according to police. Darrick Mittlestadt, the fire chief, told police his wife adopted the boys as a way of coping with the death of a family member. He admitted they hadn't taken their son to any family events or activities in more than 2 years because of his appearance, referring to him as wafer-thin. He allegedly told police, quote, "I failed everyone. I didn't do my job." The couple's younger adopted son, who's 6 years old, has since been placed into protective custody. Darrick's parents, who live in Denver, told investigators they hadn't seen either boy since 2023. But when they did care for the 13-year-old once a week, they said he had a healthy appetite and was not a problem child at all. Neighbors that were interviewed said they had seen the Mittlestadts out on their property with one boy, and most thought the family had just one son. Both Angela and Darrick have now turned themselves in. And here to break down this story with me is family law attorney Randy Kessler. Randy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Always great to be with you, Kennedy.
So let's just jump right in. I mean, people assume that child abuse cases are always straightforward, but in reality, how difficult are they to prosecute, especially when the victim can't fully advocate for themselves?
Well, they can be very difficult, right? You can't get yourself inside the shoes of these people who apparently were originally at least trying to do the right thing and taking care of a child so the child's not on welfare and a burden to the taxpayer. But, the question is always, when did it go wrong? And when did they realize it went wrong? Obviously, much too late. And they thought they were doing the right thing by, finally fessing up and bringing the child out of the home. But, what goes on in someone's house that they could let it get to that point? I don't know. This one should be easier to prosecute than others. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. One picture of that child, I don't know how they defend it.
Hey guys, I have to pause for just a second to tell you about this free app called Upside that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas and groceries. I'm so into Upside, I now use it every single time I pump my gas because it's so easy, it's free, and of course, that cash back. Yeah, that's right, this is actually real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside account. You can transfer it straight into your bank account. So here's what you do. Download the Upside app for free and buy whatever you plan to purchase. purchase, pay as usual with a debit or credit card, file that claim in the app, and that's it. Then you get paid. To find out how much you could save with Upside, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on our screen and use our promo code LC News to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. How much time are they realistically facing, if any time at all?
Oh, there's a lot of time. I mean, these kind of crimes, it's not just the what the law provides and whatever the minimum is for that particular crime, whether it's 10 years or 20 years. Judges always have discretion, right? Can we give the maximum? Can we give the minimum? Every elected official and every judge and every legislator, they always want to protect children because they don't have a say. They don't have a vote. They're the innocent people that we're supposed to protect. There's a saying, it's a Latin saying that we use in family law. The court acts as parens patriae. We are the state acting as the ultimate parents to protect children. And the best way to protect children is not let people like this have a shot at doing it against somebody else. I think they're looking at a lot of time. It's not a death penalty case. It's not a murder case, thankfully, and it could have been. But I don't see they're going to be out of jail anytime in their working years or their healthy years.
How unusual is it for someone in a high ranking role? I mean, we're talking about a fire chief, right? But how unusual is it for someone like that to be arrested for something so egregious? Does it complicate the legal process at all?
It does, but it's sort of the same old thing we hear all the time, and that you cover a lot. Not in my neighborhood, not my friend. That person wouldn't do that. He or she, they were such good people. You never know. This does seem, in some sense, and not to forgive the defendants, a case more of extreme negligence than an intentional, we're going to starve this kid to death. It seems like they just didn't do their job as parents and they let it fester and they didn't do the right thing. I don't see any evidence yet that they said, we're going to start off with a very healthy young child and we're going to turn him into this 55-pound child. It sounds more like they just didn't do their job, or he didn't pay attention, and somehow everything else in the world was more important than taking care of this child. And maybe that's what I want to believe, is that they just made a terribly bad mistake than an intentional act. So that's going to be their only defense. But the fact that he's a public figure, that he's a fire chief, at this point in my career, I don't say, oh, that person couldn't have done something bad. I've seen great people do terrible things, and I've seen terrible people do great things.
What should they have done if there really were behavioral issues like the parents are allegedly claiming, and they felt like, okay, we adopted this child, he's allegedly out of control? What is the right and the proper thing to do?
Well, they say sunlight's the best disinfectant. Put some sunlight on it. Bring them into a clinic. Bring them into a therapeutic environment where, at least if they can't help the child, they're not going to be accused of causing this damage. It got to a point where it got beyond therapeutic. It was physical. This child needed medical attention. So if you can't help the child mentally and emotionally, which you should, if you don't recognize that, then when the child is not 100 pounds and down to 55 pounds, you're ignoring their medical needs too. That's medical abuse as well as emotional and mental abuse.
Right. I mean, like you mentioned, 55 pounds at 13 years old. I can't even fathom what that looks like. But from a legal perspective, what do terms like conspiracy to commit child abuse actually mean? And how do prosecutors prove that charge?
Well, I think they don't need that in this case. Conspiracy would be that you all did it as a group effort. So if there's somebody that wasn't in the home that they were having participate by having that person cover up for them or run interference, but they were both active participants. So it's like if, you and I both had a gun and we both shot somebody, it might be a conspiracy, but we're both guilty of murder. If I had a gun and I gave it to you and I left the home and said, here, I'll give you $10,000 to shoot this person, that might be a conspiracy. I don't think they need to prove conspiracy unless it's an extra charge and they want to get some extra years. Um, and also, I think the public is sort of disenchanted with the term conspiracy. You think P. Diddy, you think all these big cases. Conspiracy is sort of harder to prove. You got to get in somebody's mind. These guys were actively taking care of a child, or supposed to be taking care of a child, and they failed. Both of them. Both parents have a duty.
The child reportedly told investigators that he was blocked in his room and only fed once a day. What kind of forensic or testimonial evidence will prosecutors look for to support that?
Well, first of all, those are other charges. That's kidnapping. You don't let somebody leave, so that you can add that on. Can you kidnap your own child? Well, when you're doing this kind of stuff to them, I bet you can. But forensic evidence, first of all, you're going to have the child's word. You're going to, second of all, see if the parents disagree or dispute it, if they testify, and they will go in there and they'll look at the house and the surroundings and see if there's scratch marks on the floor for when furniture was moved to block the door. Look at marks on the inside of the door to try to get out. But really, it's going to be from the mouth of the child. And is he credible or not? And does he have some ulterior motive to blame them? Obviously he's got some issues and some things wrong with him, and he should, given the way he was treated. But I think his testimony is going to be the most powerful. Forensic will just back it up, or maybe there won't be any forensic evidence and they'll have to rely on him. But I think there's going to be stuff there that shows scratch marks on the floor, furniture being leaned into a door, the door having dent marks. There's After that much time locked in a room, he tried to get out, and there's something on the door showing that he tried to get out.
The suspects reportedly avoided taking him to family events because of how he looked. That's according to documents. Could that be used to establish maybe even a pattern of concealment or shame? And if so, how would that show up in court?
Yeah, or consciousness of guilt, right? It's sort of like fleeing the scene after a crime. If someone flees the scene, if you didn't do anything wrong, why'd you run away? Well, I thought I was going to be falsely accused, and that'll be their defense. Well, this child was sick, and we didn't want people thinking it was our fault. So that's certainly going to be their defense. But why not bring him to somebody? Even if I did something wrong, it's not getting any better. Let's first take care of the child. So I think that's going to be relevant. It's additional abuse too, to not let anybody see the child who might intervene. You know, Innocent bystanders help. You'll see stories in a grocery store. Somebody watches a parent abuse a child and they report the child abuse. That child is saved. This child didn't have a chance being locked in his room, not being exposed to people who would otherwise care about him, grandparents, relatives. Uh, just a shame, a tremendous shame that nobody could step in because the parents concealed this horrible crime.
Angela reportedly said that she didn't ask for help because the child wasn't anyone else's problem. Is that kind of statement legally significant or just morally disturbing?
It's morally disturbing. All of her comments, that she said it was an effed up child, and she said that she didn't, she's child blaming, victim blaming. You know, Remorse is all she should be exhibiting. I feel terrible. Whether I'm guilty or not, I still feel terrible for this child. That's the only thing she should say. I imagine she hasn't talked to a lawyer. She's talked to a lawyer. She's not gotten good advice, or she's not followed the good advice from a lawyer, which is you do not say anything except express remorse. That's just sort of telling you it was the child's fault, blaming the child. Maybe the child did have medical issues. Maybe the child was rebellious. Doesn't deserve to be 55 pounds at 13 years old.
And the boy's doctor mentioned, arrested bone growth. From a legal standpoint, does that kind of diagnosis help prosecutors prove long-term abuse and not just one-time neglect?
It sounds like it does. Of course, I'm not a doctor, but that sort of sounds like what they're leading up to, which is this was not a one time we locked you in. This was this consistent pattern of malnutrition and not feeding and not letting a child grow is going to have lifelong damages. And that might be more relevant to a civil case. There may be a civil claim. I don't know if there's any money to collect, but this child should have a pot of money, a nest of money to help his rehabilitation mentally and physically. So that kind of stuff is important. The medical damages are going to be important to see how do we compensate or find some funds to reward the child, not reward, but to make sure there's funds there so he can rehabilitate his health mentally and physically.
And just speaking more on the victim blaming that you were just speaking about a moment ago, I mean, Angela allegedly admitted the child was malnourished, but blamed him for not eating, saying he's so skinny because it was his choice of what he chose not to eat this or chose not to eat that. How does the court separate parental frustration from criminal responsibility?
Yeah, well, it's sort of hard to prove when you only give a child food once a day to say he refused to eat. You sit him down at a buffet and you take a video and you say, see, he's not eating. That'd be a little bit different. Um, Nobody that's 55 pounds and weigh at 13 years old doesn't want to eat, right? And it's a pattern. They might have trained him not to want to eat. And, people that are in jail in horrible conditions, their bodies change and they don't desire as much food. They need sustenance, but they probably couldn't go to a buffet and eat a lot. But, to try to blame him, anything they do to point the finger at the child is only going to backfire, right? There's that Dire Straits song, when you point your finger, you got three more pointing back at you. Well, they got fingers pointing back at them.
And Darrick, the fire chief, he allegedly said that he failed everyone. Could statements like that be used against him in court, or would a defense team argue that it does show remorse, like how you were just saying, and not guilt?
Yeah, I think it's helpful because certainly they made a mistake. The question isn't, did they make a mistake? Did they do wrong? The question, is it criminal? Is it a criminal act? Did they have the intent to commit a crime? And that's a much better statement, to have remorse. And it could go to sentencing, right? When they do decide that he's guilty, the judge has to decide, do I give him the max, the minimum, somewhere in the middle? Well, if he's not remorseful and doesn't recognize what he did, why would I want this guy back out on the street to do it again? If he realizes what he did wrong, I'm much more sympathetic. I think that was a good statement by Darrick.
And the parents claim that they adopted the teen from a trauma background. Could their defense team try to argue that they were just unequipped and overwhelmed? Does that ever hold up in court?
Certainly they should argue it, and they do get some credit and some brownie points, right? That's a good thing. People that adopt are generally good people if you're adopting for the right reason, and there's no evidence that they weren't adopting for the right reason. The problem is you don't just adopt and put a kid in a bedroom and lock him in, right? You adopt and you take that child on as one of your own, and you want that child to succeed. So I think that's one of the few good facts that the defense team has, is that they didn't birth this child. They went out and chose this child to try to save the child from a life of being an orphan and not having parents around and not being raised by a loving family. If that was their intent, maybe that's a good fact. It doesn't really solve the case and it doesn't really defend them, but I don't think it hurts them that they adopted the child.
And I'm just wondering, since this was through an adoption, which is a process, and there's so many, like a checks and balances system, they adopted this boy in 2019. What oversight, if any, does the state have over adoptive parents after finalization? And is that a gap here?
Uh, Maybe it should be, but they're so good and the states are so specific about who can adopt that once you adopt a child, that child is the same as legally as if you birthed that child. So maybe what we're really saying is the state should oversee not just adopted children, but children that are born to families, right? Does the state have a duty to look into children? So the fact that the child was adopted, that's it. Once the adoption goes through, that's their legal child, treated the same as if she gave natural childbirth or surrogate childbirth or artificially reproduced technology birth. That's their child. So the state does not have a duty to go and monitor adopted children any more than the state has a duty to monitor children that you and I may have naturally in our homes. If somebody is abusing a child, the state should step in if they can. But if somebody adopted a child versus having their own child, you know, once you clear them for adoption, you're saying as a state, these people are authorized to raise this child. God bless. Thank you for adopting. Please raise this child well, just like we hope every human being does with their own children.
Now, what I found interesting about this story was that the couple also adopted another child. They had a 6-year-old little boy who is now in protective custody. So after this happened and the police learned of the situation, they took that little boy out of the home. What happens to that child, and how fast do courts move to terminate parental rights?
Well, if they get a conviction, then it'll be really easy. If they admit or they plead guilty, then they'll be admitting it to everyone that they can't raise a child. Otherwise, I don't see them fighting for that child. I don't know how they would get that child back while they're under this umbrella of suspicion, because then during that process of custody and fighting for custody, they would be subject to depositions and discovery and things that might shed light on what they did for this other child. I mean, it's just horrible. Fairy tales come to mind, Cinderella and children, the 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 swan and the story of the child treated. It's just terrible that there was another child there. Thank goodness that child is going to find safety, we hope.
But I'm wondering just about the trauma there, right? Like this 6-year-old ripped out of the home, he doesn't know what's going on. He probably doesn't understand what's happening. How do courts weigh the trauma of removing a sibling from a home when balancing what's safest long term?
So I'm going to speak from my experience, which is as a divorce lawyer, and I hear from psychologists all the time that when parents separate, the younger a child is, the better. When children grow up knowing a household and they're 12, 13, 14, and their whole world falls apart because their parents divorce, in some ways, that's the silver lining. Maybe this child might just be young enough to not really remember much of this, or to have their whole life from age 6 until 90 or 100, however long they live, be living not under the roof and under the control of these parents. Had it been age 10 and 12, children get conflicted, right? That's my mom, that's my dad. They couldn't be bad people. Kids that have parents that are in jail still want to believe their parents are good people. They're wrongfully convicted or they made a mistake. This child will hopefully grow up not feeling that kind of guilt and knowing that this child was saved from potentially a similar situation as a 13-year-old sibling.
Any chances that he could potentially take the stand as well, or do you think he's too young?
If they need it, they could do it in a forensically safe environment. I don't think they need it. I can't imagine this case going to trial. I think that the parents are going to have to find some sort of plea arrangement where they take responsibility. I don't know how they get out of it. Um, but you never know. Worst case scenario, prosecution is going to list that 6-year-old as a witness. Um, but after the 13-year-old testifies, I don't know how the case continues without a plea or how anybody says we need something else. But that'll be a decision for the prosecution to make, and mental health experts who might say, listen, you put the 6-year-old on the stand, it's going to terribly ruin his life. Or you put the 6-year-old on the stand and it's going to be cathartic and the child's going to feel good that he helped his brother. I just don't know what the situation is until I forensically interview the child. And again, it's not my expertise.
Right. And it will be interesting to see if this case does go to trial, because if a jury hears about the condition of the 13-year-old, we're talking about his ribs protruding, according to documents, him having missing hair at 13 years old. How does that visual impact legal strategy, especially for the defense?
Yeah, we always say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and so is a video. Yeah, there's just no getting around that. It's, you can't unsee it once it's there. If there's some other explanation, if they could prove medically this child had some medical issues, couldn't keep food down, should have been brought in for treatment earlier, but wasn't. But if there's some physical reason that contributed to the child's health, even then, it's still hard to not blame the parents. We all want closure. We want to find a reason this child's suffering. And we don't want to blame God or health or doctors. We want to blame the people that were right there that could have done something about it and didn't. These parents are going to have a hard battle if they try to defend themselves in trial.
Absolutely. And I just did a quick Google search because just wanting to know, we keep saying, this 13-year-old was 55 pounds. According to the CDC, I mean, they say the average, and of course, people can fall under that average, but the average 13-year-old male weighs anywhere between 75 to, they say, like 140, maybe even a little bit more. So just put that in perspective when we say 55 pounds of how skinny and how just malnourished this child really was, according to documents. Can prosecutors argue that the couple intentionally isolated the child to avoid detection? And if so, what kind of sentence enhancement might that bring?
I mean, that's clear. That's sort of like evidence of guilt, consciousness of guilt, as we were talking about. They didn't let the grandparents see the child. They didn't send pictures. They didn't bring the child out in public. Clearly, it's not like they said, oh my God, one day I just realized that he's too skinny and I had to bring him to the doctor. You knew he was too skinny for a long time. You knew he had health issues for a long time. It's not going to be oh my God, I just made a mistake one day. This was an effort. This was a consistent pattern. It may be multiple crimes. Every day they held him against his will or didn't feed him. Maybe that's additional counts of child cruelty, that they didn't feed him, they didn't nourish him, they locked him in the room. He may have hundreds of charges now against him and his wife. So all those facts, they definitely add up. It's not like a parent who hurt their child and they discovered the child was hurt on one occasion where the father broke the child's arm. It took time to get to this point. Um, yeah, it's going to be a heavy sentence.
Could the couple try to take plea deals separately? Maybe one will flip. I mean, how would that impact the case?
They could, but it's sort of hard because again, it wasn't one incident. If mom hurt the child and dad knew about it, dad could point the finger at mom and say, "I tried to stop her, and then afterwards I tried to cover up for her." This was Either one of them could have brought a plate of lasagna into this child, at any point in time. They're both going to be found equally culpable. I think if one turns on the other, it might backfire and say, "Listen, you're not taking responsibility. You're trying to blame someone else. You're a grown up. The child's not a grown up." Unless one of the parents was abusive, typically the male, right? But it could be the female. Maybe if they're going to claim dad was abusing the mom and threatened her with her life and she was not going to be able to live and survive and he strangled her, this stuff we haven't heard yet. I mean, some extreme situation like that where she's a victim also, maybe that comes up, maybe they get desperate. We haven't heard that yet. I don't anticipate it, but like you said, you never know what the defense is going to be.
Right. Well, this is a story that we will be following closely. Randy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
The 13-year-old remains hospitalized, where doctors say he's eating properly and expected to gain weight. According to documents, no behavioral concerns have been reported since he arrived. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.